Welcome everyone to Backpass with Ras. I hope you are well wherever you are listening to this. I'm very excited today to present a guest who has been part of many of our lives watching international and European football in Singapore and Malaysia, and I'm sure across the world as well. You would recognize him the moment you hear his voice, and it is my honor to present a commentator at World Cup, European Championships, Champions League, former UEFA Cup, Club World Cup, Confederation Cup matches, and the list goes on. Mr. John Helm. Hello, Mr. John. Thanks for joining us all the way from the UK. How are you doing today?
Oh, it's my privilege. It always is. I love talking. I love chatting about sport, football in particular, of course. And I've got many, many friends in your part of the world. And I'm about to embark on another exciting project, the Olympic Games in Tokyo, working for a company in Singapore.
All right. What's the company's name?
The Dentsu. Recently, I worked for them on the Club World Cup recently in Qatar. I've worked for them at the previous Olympic Games and Asian Games in Jakarta and in Korea as well. So really looking forward to it. They're great people to work with. And I love your part of the world, by the way. And I'm not just saying that. I really enjoy coming into your part of the world. And I don't know if you know, but I am in India for 3 months most years as well, commentating on the Hero Indian Super League. So it's my favorite part of the world.
Oh, that's nice to know. Okay, sir. Let's get the show on the road because there's just so much to talk about. And in this segment, we'll find out on Mr. John Helm, the commentator. So segment 1 starts off with my first question to you. How did you become a commentator?
Well, it's very strange, but when I was a boy growing up, I used to love listening to commentators. They were my heroes rather than sportsmen or sportswomen. I don't know if you've ever heard of a cricket commentator called John Helm, but he was an absolute institution in this country. And I was born into cricket more than football in a way. And in football, we had a commentator called Raymond Glendenny. And my ear used to be glued to the radio set in my early youth. But for the first 7 years of my working life, I was just a journalist working on newspapers. But whenever the opportunity came to cover a sports story, it seemed to fall to me. And then in 1970, I, to my astonishment, got a call from the BBC who offered me the post of sports editor of BBC Radio Leeds, which involved commentating, particularly on Leeds United, who were probably the best team in Europe at that time.
Okay, that's insight there on how you became a commentator. 1970, long time ago. Whoa.
Yes, over 50 years. But Leeds, I was very lucky because Leeds, as I say, were a great team. The names of the players, the team rolled off the tongue. I know it's before your time, but they had a team of Sprake, Reaney, Cooper, Bremner, Charlton, Hunter, Lorimer, Clark, Jones, Giles, Gray, which has gone down in folklore as the greatest Leeds team ever. And because I became attached to them, commentating on all those matches, I then got into commentating on national television and national radio as well.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, the Leeds team, I remember, not through my memory, but my father did tell me about the Leeds team from back then and how strong they were. So yeah, moving on to the next question. Leading up to a match, do you have any practices that you follow so that you sound good on match day? Maybe there's certain food or drinks that you avoid or something that you have to take?
I certainly avoid alcohol. That is for sure. It's not advisable for any commentator to imbibe before a game. No, I think I'm fairly lucky. The only other thing I would say is when I'm traveling abroad in particular, I do always take with me a throat spray. Because, when you get excited in any sport, really, and your voice hits high pitches, it can lead to problems with the tonsils. And so I do carry a throat spray around with me. But food-wise, no, I'm very strict, actually, with my own diet. In the morning, I eat fruit and have a cup of coffee. I have no lunch at all, apart from maybe a bowl of soup sometimes. But then in the evening, after a game, then I do like to have something to both eat and drink.
All right. You sound fantastic, by the way, till today. Same voice, same velvety, smooth voice.
Well, it's very kind. It's not something I've ever worked on, to be honest with you. My voice is what it is. What I do think, though, is it develops because of commentary, because you have to express yourself and you have to enunciate clearly I think your own voice does develop as a result of that. But it's not put on, I assure you. But I do despair sometimes when I hear some commentators who mumble a little bit and you can't tell what they're saying. Different people from different countries are harder to understand as well, for example. But most commentators, I think it's a prerequisite that you have to have a pretty strong voice.
On the point of commentators mumbling, you just led very nicely to my next question. Because in my observation, in your commentaries, your pronunciation of player names and team names is very authentic. How do you manage to do that? Because I've heard many commentators killing a player's name or a club's name that is maybe non-English. And there's always this tendency for commentators, especially when we are watching in this part of the world, to always link something towards the English league. But you do not do that. How do you manage to do that?
I think I've always regarded it as extremely important to get as close to the correct pronunciation as possible. I think we owe it to that person. I wouldn't like it if somebody called me John Helm, for example. And so what I've always tried to do is, before I take on an assignment, is to contact somebody within that country or within that football association or whatever, and run through all the names of the players. And I learned to do that in particular with the Polish team, because there are certain countries that are greater tests than others when it comes to pronunciation. And I was covering a Poland match. I think it was against France in the 1982 World Cup fourth playoff match. And the Polish goalkeeper's name was spelt, surname, Mlynczarek, which looked like Mlinkzarek. And I got hold of the trainer of the Polish team and asked him to run me through. And to my astonishment, it was pronounced Młynarczyk, which doesn't sound a bit like it looks. But it's so important to get that name right. It's the same with Korean names. You know, sometimes you hear them pronounced the wrong way around. And I honestly do believe that it's outrageous if you don't attempt at least to be as accurate as possible with the name. It's not always possible, to be honest with you. And where I might have a problem is something like the Olympic Games, where at the last minute, as a commentator, you can be thrust into a sport you know very little about because they desperately need a commentary putting on something, and you have no time to check it out. And I think so long as you have the time, even if it's only a couple of hours, as I say, you owe it to that person to try and get every single name right.
Yeah, that's very diligent of you to do that. And I think the players and everyone, even their supporters, whoever are fans of those players, they are really thankful that you do that for them. With the background information, how do you do your research back then in the 90s and 2000s, before the explosion of all this, you know, the internet and Google? How do you do your research back then?
Well, it's a double-sided answer, actually. In a way, it was more difficult because, as you say, quite rightly, there are things like Wikipedia now and Google, many more advantages for a commentator. You can find out anything about a Haiti under-15 girl footballer nowadays if you really search for it. But what we have lost is the honesty, the trust that existed between people like myself and managers. And I used to have, and still do have, the telephone numbers of every manager from the old First Division, say, in England around that time. And I even had the phone numbers of international managers from that time. And you were able to ring them up 24 hours before a game that you were commentating on, and they would actually run through the team with you. And again, you would be able to check pronunciations with them. I also rely a lot on local newspapers because that is a good source of information. So, for example, if I was doing a game involving Thailand, they played Manchester United. I managed to get hold of the newspaper from Bangkok and read what they're saying about it. So there were sources of information, not as many in those days, but there was that lovely mutual trust and friendship between the managers and the journalists or the broadcasters at that time. And so they were happy days. They really were. And nowadays, you really do not ever get to speak individually, personally, to a manager ever. It's always a press conference, and maybe one player is rolled out at the press conference, so everybody prints the same stories, which you notice in the newspapers. But no, so it's a double-edged sword, really. Some things are better, and some things not so good.
Oh, that's nice. I didn't know of that. You spoke to the different managers to get to know their names and the background information. What languages can you speak besides English, of course?
I taught myself Spanish, not very well, but because I knew I was going to be doing a lot of games involving Real Madrid and Barcelona and Valencia, Real Zaragoza, Deportivo La Coruña, I
Hmm.
taught myself Spanish. I learned French at school, which is pretty schoolboy French, but at most World Cups, I find myself working with a French crew. And so, therefore, it rekindles my passion or interest in the language. And I sort of try every day to speak French rather than to speak English when I'm with them.
Mhm.
It's always bon nuit or ça va or bonjour or whatever it may be. S'il vous plaît. I do try and speak as much French as possible.
Okay, so only those three languages then. What if you come across
Yes,
a
I
manager?
do. I do wish I could speak more languages. In fact, if I had the time now, I probably would do. But I don't think I've missed out to a great extent because tragically, we, the English, are very, very lazy. And wherever we go in the world, people enjoy speaking English to us.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think we've been spoilt in many ways because the English, as I say, lazy is the correct word. We tend not to learn as many languages as people from countries like your own, for example.
Hmm.
And that is to our great discredit.
Yeah, because we were former British colonies as well, so that's why we know how to speak English. Yeah, so actually I
Yes,
was
and as I say, I wish I did. I wish I did speak two or three more languages. But the funniest example, really, I was in Argentina in 1978 for the World Cup, and I went into Brazil to do the Grand Prix of all things there. And I'm not a Formula One man by any means. And I practiced my Spanish in Rio, which is a complete waste of time because Portuguese is very, very different.
yeah.
So I do have a smattering of Portuguese, obrigado, but not enough to conduct a proper conversation or to listen in at press conferences and understand what the Brazilian coach or a Portuguese might be saying.
Yeah, so what happens in those cases where you do not know the languages and how do you get the information across to the manager and from him as well?
All right, what happens now is that if you attend a press conference, you are given a headset and there is a translation and there is a guide there and it is automatically interpreted into your language. So I put on the headset, press number 2, say, and up it comes in English language, what the coaches of Brazil or the coaches of Germany, it might be in German, whichever country it is, there is an automatic translation into English, which is very, very useful.
All right, fair enough. What teams do you support? I'm sure you're an England fan.
Oh, yes. Well, of course, we're absorbed at the moment. England, yes. There are two other answers to that question. My own personal club, and you will probably never have heard of them, is called Bradford Park Avenue.
Okay.
And I first went to see them in 1953. They won 4-0 against a team called Accrington Stanley, who were in the Football League. But at that time, in the early 50s, we were a Football League club. And I remember seeing us on the news. We beat Arsenal 1-0 at Highbury. And we had some famous players, famous England international players.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my club from being a boy, and is right now in 2021 still my club. Indeed, I'm the vice president, and we're 2 divisions below the Football League. But I'm a great believer in supporting the team of your youth and the team where you live. I live in the Bradford area, so I'm very involved with Bradford Park Avenue. But the other team, and I suppose people might say everybody's favourite team, and I know we basically want to stick to 1990 to 2000 here, or 2000s. But in 1982, I had the privilege of commentating on every Brazil match in the World Cup in Spain. And that team of Zico and Falcao and Socrates and Eder and Junior was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I know one thing you want to ask me is about how we retain neutrality as a commentator.
Yeah.
It's virtually the only time in my broadcasting career that I got beaten 3-2 by Paolo Rossi, a hat-trick for Italy. And I could have cried because really I felt for a game of football, that Brazilian team should have gone down in history as the greatest football team ever. And so I've always liked Brazilian football as well as English and Bradford Park Avenue.
Okay, it's interesting to know that you're actually a vice president of a football club now.
And I get a great deal of enjoyment out of that because they're good footballers. You know, this is two divisions below the Football League, but they're professionals, so they're semi-professionals. So they do have a job to go to during the week. But on a Saturday afternoon, they pull on our green and white shirts and they give them their all. And it's still a very high standard with a lot of clubs who used to be in the Football League playing against us. York City, for example, one Boston United who were in the Football League not long ago, Kidderminster Harriers. The standard is high, and we can be playing in front of 2,000 fans. So it's not to be discounted. I'm honoured to be involved with the club still.
Yeah. So the only club that I know from Bradford is, of course, Bradford City.
Yes, well, absolutely. Most people identify me as well with the horrific incident there in 1985 when 56 people lost their lives when the stand caught fire, and I was commentating live on that game. So Bradford City is the other club, you're quite right, in my city, and I follow them keenly. And, I'm not one of those people who wants the other team in my city to lose. I want Bradford City to win. I hope they get promoted. And, of course, they played in the Premier League not all that long ago.
Yeah.
I commentated on the last game of the season against Liverpool, which they won 1-0 with a goal by David Weatherall in the sort of Robbie Fowler and that sort of era at Liverpool. And I've always taken a great interest in all Bradford sporting clubs. We have a rugby league club called Bradford Bulls, which I go and attend regularly. And I've been commentating on rugby league again recently as well. And that's been terrific because that is still a sport where you do ring the coach the day before and they are still willing to talk to you, which is wonderful. The fraternity is great.
That's an old school charm there in rugby.
Yes, very much so. Well, of course, we have rugby league and rugby union. I was brought up with rugby league, which is the 13-a-side variety. But they are terrific lads. They put their bodies on the line every weekend for very little money compared to footballers. But the entertainment value is extremely high, and they're always so willing to talk to the media, and I suppose they're desperate for the publicity. But it's a good sport to watch.
Yeah, it's true. I've been brought up in a rugby school, so quite familiar with the sport, and I have watched it, and you do appreciate things in that sport as well. So, right, thank you for going through the questions with us in segment 1. So now in segment 2, you're going to find out about Mr. John's top 3 selections. We've got some amazing questions for him, and we'll be back shortly now with segment 2.
A hat-trick for the striker. For the third time, Italy led. And this time, they would hold on to that advantage. Paolo Rossi had become a national legend. Brazil, with so many talented players, and after playing so much wonderful football, had perhaps been too open and too naive. Their beautiful game wasn't strong enough to take them to the semi-finals.
And we are back now in the show with segment 2, titled Top 3. In fact, it's titled Your Top 3. So yes, Mr. John, your first international tournament that you commentated on, what would that be?
Well, strangely, and I know this program is basically about football, but in 1974, I was asked by the BBC to go to the Commonwealth Games in Christchurch, New Zealand. And I suppose that is an international tournament. Yeah. And I loved absolutely every second of it. I interviewed about 285 sportsmen, and I commentated on various sports there. And I've always had an affinity and a love for New Zealand ever since then. In terms of football, it's my first World Cup. It's 1978 in Argentina. I went in the January to the draw and then was out there for the entire tournament. To start with, following Scotland. And so we had Scotland against Peru, Scotland against Iran, and Scotland against Holland. And typical of the Scots, I hope they don't mind me saying this, they got beaten by Peru, drew with Iran, and then beat a wonderful Holland team, full of the Johnny Reps and Harry Hans and people like that, the Van der Kerkhoff brothers. So the 1978 World Cup in Argentina, and that was the first World Cup final I went to. I commentated on the third place match between Brazil and Italy. And then the final itself was a phenomenal occasion. When you asked me about the top atmospheres and occasions, the final between Argentina and Holland was something else. Nobody went to bed that night after Argentina won the World Cup for the first time in the country's history. Every car had a horn that was hooting, and at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, it was just an absolutely memorable event to be at.
Yeah, I've read about it. I know about the backdrop of that tournament where, there was some political unrest in Argentina. You know how Argentines are so passionate about football as well. I've seen the images, the videos, and that final, I remember all the ticker tape on the field whenever they scored a goal. So, it must have been buzzing. The place must have been
Absolutely.
bouncing, in fact.
Oh, phenomenal, as you say, the ticker tape, Mario Kempes
Mario
and
Kempes,
Luque,
yeah.
Ozzy Ardiles, who, of course, was to come to England with Tottenham Hotspur a year later.
Mm.
But in all of the stadiums, Cordoba was a beautiful city where Scotland were playing. I went to Mendoza as well. And of course, in Buenos Aires, the atmosphere, as you say, there was a lot of political tension at the time with the military junta. But people seem to forget about that for the length of the tournament. And it was an absolutely wonderful experience to see the home country win the biggest global football event that there is for the first time.
And how do you get the opportunity to commentate at this tournament, the 1978 World Cup?
Right. Well, I was the BBC's football producer at that time. I moved from Radio Leeds down to London as a result of the work I'd done in Christchurch on the Commonwealth Games. And within a year or so, I was appointed to be the football producer. And so I used to cover Liverpool, Arsenal, Tottenham, Manchester United in England, but then to cover all the England international matches as well. And I was honoured to be asked to be the BBC's producer at the World Cup finals in Argentina. But as part of that, there were certain matches that required a commentary putting on. And although Peter Jones was the number one commentator at that time, he couldn't do every match. And so I got to do other games.
We spoke about the atmosphere. So your top 3 atmospheres at an international tournament, which would that be?
Well, I have to say that the 1982 World Cup, because of what I mentioned earlier about Brazil with the Falcaos and the Socrates and the Zicos, but just the colourful vibrancy of all the occasions, the warmth of the country, the fantastic atmospheres in Seville and Valencia and Madrid and Barcelona. That was an astonishing World Cup for me. But then coming nearer home in terms of time, I had the privilege of at the Beijing Olympics of seeing Usain Bolt set a world record in the 200 meters in 2008, 19.3 seconds. It just took the breath away. I was absolutely blown away by the man. He set off. He was just in a different world to anybody else. I've never seen anybody run like the wind like that. The crowd got absorbed into it over the space of less than 20 seconds. The man covered 200 meters. And you could have lit a fire with the air, the atmosphere. It was just absolutely explosive. And again, to use another example of the Olympic Games, being my own country, the 2012 Olympics with people like Jessica Ennis. I know, as I say, this is basically a football show, but I did go to Wembley Stadium. For the friendliness and the atmosphere and it being my own country, I think it was a privilege to be commentating for the only time in my life on an Olympic Games in my own country. So those 3 in terms of atmosphere would have to be the ones that stand out. Okay.
And your top 3 experiences at an international tournament?
Okay, well, you might find this strange that only one of them is a football-related thing again, and that was Diego Maradona. Diego Maradona scoring 2 goals against England, one the hand of God, and the other one of the most brilliant footballing goals that anybody could ever witness. I mean, the man was a genius without question. And so Diego Maradona playing for Argentina. The other was strangely in golf, and that was going back a long way. In 1977, I was the on-course commentator when Jack Nicklaus and Tom Watson, 2 of the great names of the sport, competed at Turnberry for the Open title, and they just battled it out, slugged it out like 2 boxers toe to toe, all the way to the very last hole, when Nicklaus holed a monster putt of 40 feet to put pressure on Watson to hold one of about 3 or 4 feet. And I was ringside, so to speak, with Tom Watson's wife. And for an atmosphere, that was just amazing. I know golf isn't everybody's sport, but to be there to watch 2 people at the pinnacle of their sports competing at the very highest level with all that pressure and in front of an amazing, immense crowd was just a total privilege. And then the third one would have to be, I'm back to cricket again here, and to Ben Stokes, who almost single-handedly beat Australia at Headingley when the game seemed absolutely lost 2 years ago. And he scored the most amazing 100 in a final wicket partnership for England to beat Australia. So they go along with that Usain Bolt moment in Beijing as the greatest experiences I've ever had at international tournaments.
Okay. And the top 3 individual football performances that you've witnessed as a commentator?
Now, one of them will seem absolutely extraordinary to you, but I hope people can relate to this. I was commentating in Finland, of all places, on the Under-17 World Cup. And Cameroon were playing Portugal. And Portugal only had to draw the match to go through to the next phase. And Cameroon had to win. And a Portuguese player scored the greatest goal I've ever seen. He was standing in the centre circle. The goalkeeper cleared it, and he spotted the other goalkeeper off his line, and he hooked the ball over his head 50 yards or 60 metres over the goalkeeper's head beneath the crossbar to give Portugal a 1-0 lead. After 75 minutes, they were leading by 5 goals to 0. So you thought, well, that's it, it's all over. And Cameroon brought on a centre forward, and they scored 5 times in 15 minutes. And that was one of the most astonishing performances I think I've ever seen. And if the game had lasted a minute longer, Cameroon would undoubtedly have won the match.
You have the names of the players?
Yes, it was Sané. And he did go on to have a good career in the game. But, it was just an astonishing performance. 5 goals in 15 minutes. I think he scored 3 of them. He didn't get all 5. But that certainly was one of them. The other one I would have said was Steven Gerrard in the Champions League final between AC Milan and Liverpool, when AC Milan were leading 3-0 at half-time. And in the second half, Steven Gerrard, he dragged that Liverpool team through the next 45 minutes with an absolutely superb individual performance, which ended in a penalty shootout, which Liverpool won. And I remember as a commentator at half-time saying, well, it's now damage limitation for Liverpool in this game. There's no way they're going to win it. AC Milan has been so much better than they were. And Liverpool, thanks to Steven Gerrard's performance, won the night. And that was just an amazing, amazing effort. And if I'm pressed for a third one in terms of football, I would have to say the Sergio Aguero moment for Manchester City, when he won them the league title against Queen's Park Rangers, when City were 2-1 down with a minute to go, and Aguero scored the goal which won City the title against all the odds. And although you talk about individual moments, and it was a team performance in so many, many ways, it was Aguero who has still gone on to become an absolute legend, whose name will live forever, immortalised by that one goal in that one game.
Yeah. On the Under-17 World Cup in Finland, which year was that?
Oh, my goodness. I'd have to check on my records now. It's about 15 years ago.
Okay.
15 or 16 years ago. And I was working for HBS, a company who organised all the coverage of those sort of tournaments, Under-17s, Under-20s. But it was played in Tampere. And as I say, the final scoreline was 5 apiece.
Okay, got to Google.
I think it was Viana who scored the great goal for Portugal. And then, as I say, this chap Sané, I think it was, came on, and it was just the most astonishing game to commentate on and to turn around.
Was that Hugo Viana that you said?
Yes.
Okay. Got to go and look at it on YouTube to see if we can find any.
Have a look at it. Have a look at it.
All right. A personal question I got to ask you. Did you watch Roberto Baggio play?
Yes, I saw Roberto Baggio play in the World Cup in 1990 for Italy, the Divine Ponytail.
Yeah.
And of course, Schillaci was the striker who took all the headlines in that World Cup.
Yeah.
But Baggio was a very, very special player. They had a lot of special players around at that time, of course.
Yeah.
But he was the one that was the darling of the Italian media, really, I suppose, because he stood out because of his appearance and also because of his flamboyant approach to the game.
All right. That's my all-time favorite player. That's why I asked.
Right, that's why you asked. Yeah. No, he was a fantastic player.
Okay. Your top 3 team football performances you've witnessed as a commentator?
Well, without question, top of that list would be Germany 7, Brazil 1 in Belo Horizonte in the World Cup in 2014. Where are we now? 2012, 2014. It was the only time I've been commentating at a game where after 28 minutes, the director was cutting up shots of the crowd in tears and people going out of the stadium because Germany were leading by 5 goals. 5 goals against Brazil in their own country in less than half an hour. And I felt desperately sad, desperately sorry for the Brazilians. Much as it was a wonderful German performance, you had to feel for them in front of their own people, the humiliation factor.
Yeah.
I'd been at Scolari's press conference the day before, and Thiago Silva as well, who was missing from that game, incidentally. Yeah. He'd spoken too. And they were so up for it. And, you know, here it is, you know, Brazil in their own country are going to make it through to the World Cup final. And the humiliation factor was just so immense. And as I say, when the director was giving you pictures of people in the crowd in tears, inconsolable, and people going out of the gates because they knew their team was beaten. Oscar coming off the pitch at half-time in tears. I've never, ever seen anything like that. But then the question was about the greatest team performance. So you have to say Germany. You know, to take on Brazil in their own country in the World Cup and score 7 is just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So that has to be right at the top of my list.
Okay.
Second one, I'm going back to golf again here now, and I'd have to check on the year. I meant to do that and I didn't do. But you know, golf is very much a passion of mine. And the greatest event in golf is the Ryder Cup between Great Britain and Europe and the United States of America. Yeah. And there was a competition only about 4 years ago, I think now, where USA looked absolutely nailed on to win it when it came to the singles on the final day. And Europe pulled through with some astonishing individual performances. But it was the team that mattered that day. And the team pulled for one another. And they won the Ryder Cup when nobody expected it. And to anybody who's got an interest in golf, we know what a difficult sport it is. So to perform under the pressure that exists with a massive crowd, and it was in America as well, like that is phenomenal to be able to do that. So that would have to go down as my second. And what was my third one? Did you want it to be football again, or could it be any sport?
I would want it to be football.
Is it right? Okay. The next outstanding football performance then that I saw would be, well, I have to, and if you want it to be as modern as possible, I'm going to go for my own country, England, in the Under-17 World Cup of 2017 in India, where as a commentator, I know you were asking me about being able to retain neutrality. Yeah. And in Calcutta, England played Spain in the final, and we were 2 goals down at half-time. Before half-time, 2 goals down. And this was an England team, bear in mind, including Phil Foden and Jadon Sancho, who are absolutely top performers now. A chap called Ryan Brewster, who's been playing the English Premier League. Some really excellent players, Sessignon, the fullback. And England came back to score 5 times and win. And as an Englishman, you have to admit that you wanted to commentate on an England World Cup victory. And this team was magnificent. And 9 or 10 of them have gone on to play Premier League football since. But that day in Calcutta, I was a truly proud Englishman and tried not to be partisan because it was a world feed commentary. But that was very, very hard because to see England, as I say, as a commentator, win a World Cup is a pinnacle of your career and obviously a pinnacle of all their careers as well.
that's the platform to what England have now.
Yes, very much so, because Sancho and Foden are part of this group of players. And there'll be others in the future who might well come through as well. There's a centre-half called Lati who was excellent. I've just mentioned Sessegnon, the full-back.
Yeah.
Gibbs White, who plays in the Premier League for Wolverhampton Wanderers. Smith Rowe at Arsenal. They were all members of that squad. And all have gone on to show that they can compete at the very highest level of football.
Okay, and what would you say would be the dullest match that you have commentated on? Football
Well,
match.
there was a reason for it. And again, I would have to check the year for you. It was early 2000s. And it was between the United States of America and Korea Republic under 20 World Cup, played in the United Arab Emirates. And the reason I'm saying it was the dullest match I've had to commentate on, both teams knew that if USA won 2-0, they would both qualify for the next round. And USA scored 2 goals. I remember a chap called Eddie Johnson got one of them in the first 5 minutes. And for the next 85 minutes, the two teams just passed the ball between themselves across the halfway line. No pretense of trying to score a goal for 85 minutes. And because I was working for FIFA, that is a very difficult situation to find yourselves in, because you don't want to criticise the organisers, but it's the format of the tournament that dictated the way the game was played. But dull, absolutely horrendous to commentate on. In English terms, I once did Darlington 0, Leyton Orient 0, and that was completely forgettable. But the one where I was commentating is definitely the one between USA and Korea Republic.
In those kind of situations, how do you retain any interest at all?
Oh, to be brutally honest, you don't, because all you can do is say who's passing the ball to who. You try to explain the circumstances without being critical, because you have to say, well, it's quite obvious that these two sides have settled for this scoreline. It means that they will be going through to the round of 16. And that means that 2 other countries, whichever they were, will be going out of the tournament. It's very sad for them. And then you do another bout of passing between certain players. And if anybody was to ask me advice on how you commentate, I honestly can't give it, because you can see what's happening, you know the circumstances, and there is nothing you can do about it. Do you condone it or do you not condone it? Depends who you're working for. Difficult.
Okay, I've got that now. Okay, because we talk about your top 3, maybe you're just going to throw in one. Which was the worst team performance you've witnessed?
Well, I have to say, I'm afraid it was Brazil for that 7-1 loss against Germany. It really was. I mean, they were awful. Germany could have scored 10 or 12 that day. They almost took the foot off the accelerator pedal in the second half. When I saw this, I've got another one as well, by the way, but really that was such a poor performance from the Brazilians, whether they were just overawed by the occasion. Everything seemed to get to them. Germany were excellent, of course, with people like Muller excelling and Philipp Lahm, and they were a very good side, obviously. But for the public to witness their own team being so lackluster really was horrific. And I felt for them. I felt for the players, because they don't deliberately turn on a poor performance, but they were absolutely wretched. And the only other game I can compare it with was I was once doing a live Sunday afternoon for ITV in England, Newcastle United and Leicester City. And Newcastle scored 6 in the first half, and Leicester just dragged themselves off the field at half time. That's the only 2 times I've ever seen so many goals in the first half of a match. And it's wretched in a way. You feel guilty being a part of it, because it's such a mismatch. Men against boys is the phrase that we often tend to use in that. And Leicester would just be bedraggled that day and just like being pulled through a mincer. And it was a Kevin Keegan, Newcastle United side. He was the manager at the time.
Oh, okay.
And 2 players got hat-tricks. I think Shearer got a hat-trick, and I think Robert Lee got a hat-trick. And it was just embarrassing.
That's Leicester with
you don't want to
Martin
see a
O'Neill.
team embarrassed.
That's Leicester with Martin O'Neill.
I'm trying to think who the Leicester City manager was now. I don't think it was Martin O'Neill, actually. I remember Steve Walsh got a consolation goal for them. As I said, Kevin Keegan was the manager of Newcastle at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, are you going to try and highlight it? Are you going to try and find the goals?
Yeah, I'm sure you can get that.
Okay. It may not have been Stu. It may have been David Kelly who got the other hat trick, and Rob Lee definitely. But it was 7-1. There aren't too many occasions where it's been Newcastle 7, Leicester 1 with 6-0 at half time.
All right. So in conclusion now, what is your relationship like with other football commentators?
Very good. We are quite a fraternity, and it doesn't matter whether you work for BBC or ITV or Sky. Most commentators are pretty helpful to one another as well. We are a little group, small group of friends, to be honest with you. Even when you lose some jobs that you've had to another commentator, I wouldn't say there's a great deal of ill feeling. It goes with the beast. I mean, I've been exceedingly lucky to have done 10 World Cups, half a dozen European Championships. And so I grew up with people like John Motson and Brian Moore. And then I took over from Martin Tyler at Yorkshire Television. And then since then, other commentators have come along, like Peter Drury. At the moment, you've got Sam Matterface at the moment, who I don't really know well. He's the new breed. But we occasionally all get together. I have a big friend called John Murray who works for BBC Radio, and he and I and another commentator, Dave Woods, who's done quite a lot of football. We often get together for a chit chat and find out what's going on in the business. So that there's not a lot of ill feeling at all between commentators. We all know the difficulties of the job, and we all tend to help one another wherever and whenever we can. And it's always a delight to bump into them, especially at international venues. We often go out for meals together. We may be in South Africa or Brazil or Russia, but it's great when we all meet up and we all go out and have a meal together.
Oh, that's nice. Nice to know that everyone's closely knit then.
Yes, it's very closely. And the other thing, of course, is that ex-professional footballers who become our co-commentators are very much a part of that group now. I used to love working with Joe Royal and Terry Butcher, for example. I've worked a lot with Paul Macefield, who's based down in Singapore, doing the Asian Cup and the Indian League. We've done a lot of commentaries together. I used to work with Martin O'Neill, with Kevin Keegan, and they become, at the last World Cup, I had a meal out in Russia with Glenn Hoddle and Henrik Larsson, and it's Jermaine Genus. They're all really good guys, and we genuinely do all get on. We all enjoy a laugh and a joke and a drink and a good meal out together.
Okay. So at the start of the show, I reeled off some of the tournaments where I remember you commentating in. Is there anything that I missed out? Maybe do you commentate in La Liga or Serie A?
Oh, well, funnily enough, I did cover Argentine football and Spanish football for quite a long time for a company called Screen Sport based in London. I've covered 29 different sports in my career. I've been very lucky, even things like speedway, snooker, darts. I've done all of those. I've done the Olympic Games. I've done a lot of rowing and canoeing. And I seem to land for all the sports that begin with a B when it gets to the Olympics. So listen out, I'll probably find myself doing badminton and boxing and basketball again. Canoeing I've done, kayaking I've done. And I've been to Wimbledon. I've done 20 Open Golf Championships as well. That's been a privilege. I love my golf. I'm a terrible player, but I love it.
I can sense that, your passion for golf.
Yes, it's a great antidote for me. Football is such a busy life and a busy sport that when you get onto the golf course, you can switch off entirely. And even if you only hit 2 or 3 good shots, you take those home with you. And my son is he's a cameraman on the European Golf Tour. So, and I used to commentate on the European Tour as well. In fact, when I was in Malaysia, I played at Negara Subang and also at Saujana. In fact, a monkey pinched my golf balls in a bunker in Saujana, which is a memory I will never forget. I was there for the Commonwealth Games of 1998 in Kuala Lumpur, watching a lot of cricket. And I even got to bowl to Sachin Tendulkar while I was there. because he was
Okay.
playing for India at the time. And when he was playing for Yorkshire, we sponsored him. Yorkshire Television sponsored him. So, yeah, I've been fantastically fortunate to be involved in sport for over 60 years, to have covered, as I say, 29 major sports, to have gone to just about every major sporting event you could think of. I've never done the Masters. I would love to do the US Masters. But Asian Games I've done. So how many people can say that they've had a life where they've travelled the world doing what they love doing, savouring every single second of it and seeing the best of the best in the best?
Yeah, not many, I would say.
No, very, very few.
Yeah. So where would we get to hear you in future tournaments, especially football?
Well, certainly in India, when I work for Star Sports, that goes out all over Asia. I tend to do the East Asian Championships, which are usually rotated between Japan, China, and Korea. I don't do a great deal of football in this country now, but I still do some golf. So it's still possible to hear me on golf, which goes out on Sky. And then, as I say, things like the Asian Games. I did the last ones in Jakarta. The last Asian Cup, which I did, was in UAE. And so, across Asia, my voice still does tend to be there quite frequently, and especially with the Indian Super League.
Okay. Any chance of hearing you at the next World Cup? Any idea yet?
I very much hope so. I am approaching, I will be 80 next year. And so if it's not to be, it's not to be. And it's been a wonderful innings anyway. And I do understand that younger people have to come and take over. I was in Qatar recently, so I can say that I've already commentated at 2 of the World Cup stadiums. That was for the Club World Cup. There's another Club World Cup later this year. But if I can make it to Qatar 2022, I'd very much like that. It would be my 11th World Cup, as I say, going back to 1978. I've only missed one, which was France 98. I've done every other World Cup. And so, yeah, the hope springs eternal. My body's good. I feel very, very fit. I still go on a treadmill every morning. I do 40 minutes. I play golf and I still walk the course and pull my own trolley. So I try to keep fit. I like to think I'm still mentally alert. With a good memory. So who knows? Never say never is the phrase, I think, the answer to that question. Very much hope to be there, part of Qatar 2022.
Okay. Hopefully looking forward to that. Anything you'd like to say to your fans, especially those based here in Singapore and Malaysia?
Well, I'd like to say that, first of all, thank you to everybody who has been a part of my career, because the longevity factor has meant a great deal to me. The fact I started 8 decades ago in 1959 as a journalist, and I'm still working here in 2021. And I've always enjoyed coming to Asia. So the likes of Singapore and Malaysia have featured very strongly for me throughout the last 20 years, certainly, of my career. I think I've always been conscious of the fact that it's been a privilege to do what I do. There are so many people you meet in life who think they've got a bad lot, who don't enjoy their work. And I've never, ever woken up without wanting to go to work and to look ahead to what's lying in store for me. Not many people can say that. I am part of what I suppose is the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
You can probably tell I love talking about sport.
Yeah.
I'm very passionate about it. Not many people have the honour, the privilege of talking to people like yourselves about the jobs that we do. And if you don't enjoy what I've done, then life certainly wouldn't have been worth living, because it has been the most wonderful life, really. And I do thank everybody who's been a part of it and who's, listened to me. And it does mean something to me when you say that, your voice is recognisable and people know you around the world. I think that's absolutely marvellous. And I just hope I have been able to entertain people throughout those 60 years.
Yeah. So those nice pearls of wisdom from you, Mr. John. And thanks for sharing all your experience as well. And your passion, of course, comes through listening into you as well. I think it's been a wonderful session that we've had here. We'll reach the end of it. And I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Hopefully, maybe one day when the borders are open and you're in this part of the world, we can meet up.
It has been my privilege as always. Thank you, everybody.
All right. So with that, we bring the end. Back Pass with Ras, a session with Mr. John Helm. Till we meet again.
Oh, it might get worse. This is from far. This is quite astonishing. It's all over now. It really is all over for Brazil. 2 for Kroos in 2 minutes. It's a disaster. The little boy is crying his eyes out. The whole nation is in disbelief, stunned into silence. Toni Kroos has scored not 1 but 2 goals in 2 minutes, his first in the World Cup finals. It's a disaster day for Brazilian football. Khedira, Kroos, the goalkeeper nowhere. It's all over.